All right, our fans, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive to help you crush that grade 12 art exam?
Let's do it.
Okay, last time we tackled question 2, all about data in surrealism.
Ah, yes. Those rule breakers.
But today we're moving on to question 3.
Conceptual art and international contemporary artists.
Definitely a bit of a brain twister, but don't worry, we'll break it all down for you so you can not only ace those exam questions, but also get those creative juices flowing for your own artwork.
Absolutely. Now, conceptual art is a little tricky to define. It's not so much about a particular style like you might see in Renaissance or Baroque art, but more about the idea behind the work. The concept takes center stage.
So it's less about what we see and more about what we think.
Exactly. And that's where understanding the why behind each artwork is so important. Your source material breaks down conceptual art into handy categories, which is a good starting point for studying. But always ask yourselves, why is this particular piece considered conceptual art? What sets it apart from other art movements?
I'm ready to put on my thinking cap. Now, our notes mention a certain Marcel Duchamp. Where does he fit into all of this?
Ah, Duchamp. He's a key figure, a huge influence on conceptual art. But here's the catch, and this is important for your exam. Duchamp influenced conceptual art, but he's not technically considered part of the movement itself.
So he's like the precursor, the one who paved the way.
Exactly. Think about his famous fountain from 1917.
Oh, right, the urinal.
Yes, a ready-made urinal placed in an art context. It caused a scandal. And that was Duchamp's point. He was challenging the very definition of art, saying that anything could be art if the artist intended it to be art.
Whoa, that's a pretty powerful statement. So it's like saying, I declare this random object as art, and suddenly, poof, it is.
In a way, yes. Duchamp shifted the focus from craftsmanship and traditional artistic skills to the artist's intention. He basically handed the power to decide what art is to the artist.
That's a game changer for sure. Okay, so Duchamp planted the seed, and then conceptual art grew from there.
Precisely. And it branched out in some really fascinating directions.
Well, let's explore those branches. Our first stop is conceptual art, based on language. And I have to admit, I'm intrigued by Lawrence Wiener. He's described as a sculptor whose medium is language. How did that even work?
It's pretty mind-blowing, right? Instead of using traditional sculptural materials like marble or bronze, Wiener creates sculptures using words.
So instead of shaping physical objects, he's shaping ideas with language.
You've got it. His work often takes the form of text-based installations or even just simple statements. He famously said, "Without language, there is no art."
So reading one of Wiener's pieces is like experiencing a sculpture in your mind.
Exactly. Think about his piece, Earth to Earth, Ashes to Ashes, Dust to Dust from 1970. Just those words conjure up so much imagery.
You're right. I'm seeing the cycle of life and death, the natural processes of decay and renewal. It's powerful stuff, even without any physical object to look at.
That's the beauty of Wiener's work. It exists in the space between language and the viewer's imagination. He believed that the physical form of the artwork wasn't as important as the concept behind it. And this idea really solidified for him when one of his outdoor installations was unfortunately damaged.
Oh, right. I remember reading about that. It actually led him to create his famous three-point statement about art creation.
You remember it. Hit me with it.
Okay, here goes. 1. The artist may construct the piece. 2. The piece may be fabricated. 3. The piece need not be built.
Nailed it. And all three are equally valid.
So the responsibility of completing the artwork shifts to the viewer. They become a co-creator.
Precisely. Wiener's work challenges that traditional artist-viewer dynamic, making the audience an active participant in the creation of meaning.
I love that. What else is interesting about Wiener's work?
Well, he later incorporated idioms and cliches into his pieces, playing with how meaning is shaped by social and cultural context.
Oh, that's so clever. Like how the same phrase can have completely different meanings depending on who's saying it and where they are.
Exactly. Wiener's work highlights how language is a powerful tool for shaping our understanding of the world, and how meaning is not fixed but fluid and open to interpretation.
That's pretty mind-blowing. Okay, so we've explored language as art. What other conceptual approaches should we be familiar with for the exam?
Let's shift gears to conceptual art based on the idea or concept. And here, Agnes Deans is a pioneer. She was creating environmental art long before it became mainstream.
Environmental art back then.
Yeah.
She was way ahead of her time.
She was. Deans uses art to highlight ecological concerns and even propose solutions. One of her most striking works is Rice Tree Burial, created in 1968. It's a performance piece with layers of symbolism that make you really think about our relationship with nature.
Okay, you've got my attention. Tell me more.
So Dian's planted rice symbolizing life and sustenance, but she also chained trees together, representing human interference with nature. And then to add another layer, she buried poetry, symbolizing the power of ideas and their potential impact on the environment.
Wow, there's so much going on in that piece. What was you trying to say?
It's multifaceted. Deneen's was raising questions about the need for preservation, the consequences of ecological decline, and even global hunger. Remember, this was the 1960s. She was bringing these issues to the forefront through her art.
It's amazing how an artwork from decades ago can still resonate so strongly today.
Absolutely. And one thing that distinguishes Dean's from other land artists is her focus on working with nature, not against it. Her goal is to illuminate the beauty and fragility of the natural world, not to disrupt or impose upon it.
I admire that approach. So we've seen language as art. We've explored art that tackles big ideas. What's next on our conceptual art journey?
Let's head to the great outdoors. We're moving on to conceptual art based on sight. Think of it this way. The location of the artwork becomes a vital part of its meaning.
Okay, I'm following you. So the artwork is inseparable from its surroundings.
Exactly. And one artist who really embodies this approach is Nancy Holt, a land artist who was captivated by the vast landscapes of the American West. Her work emphasizes the importance of directly experiencing the artwork.
So we can't just look at a photograph or read a description. We have to actually be there to fully understand it.
You got it. Think about her most renowned piece, Sun Tunnels, created in 1979.
I've seen pictures of that. 4 massive concrete tubes in the desert, right?
Yes, arranged in an X shape in the middle of the Utah desert. And they're carefully aligned so that on the solstices, the sun rises and sets perfectly within them.
It's like a giant astronomical calendar built into the landscape.
Exactly. Holt wanted viewers to stand inside those tunnels, feel the changing light and temperature, and connect with the vastness of the desert and the cosmic cycles of the sun. The artwork isn't just an object, it's an experience.
I can see how that would be a profound experience. It makes you feel small in a good way, you know, connected to something bigger than yourself. Did Holt create any other significant works?
She did. Another notable piece is Hydra's Head, which she created in 1974. This one connects to her fascination with both astronomy and water.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground already. From Duchamp's fountain to these incredible land art installations, it's clear that conceptual art is so much more than what we might initially expect.
You're getting it. Ready to delve a little deeper?
Absolutely. Bring on the next category.
Okay, let's step into a realm where art gets up close and personal, literally. We're talking about conceptual art based on the body. And one of the key figures here is Vito Acconci, who, believe it or not, started his career as a poet.
A poet turned performance artist. That's quite a transition. What kind of performances did he do?
Well, Acconci was known for pushing boundaries, often using sex and eroticism in his performances to challenge societal norms and make audiences uncomfortable.
Sounds pretty edgy. Do you have an example?
One of his most controversial pieces is Seedbed from 1972. It's definitely a challenging one. Acconci hid under a ramp in a gallery and spent hours, well, masturbating, while fantasizing about the visitors walking above him.
Whoa, that would definitely provoke some strong reactions.
Yeah.
What was he trying to achieve with such a provocative piece?
Acconci was intentionally confronting the audience, forcing them to confront their own feelings about sex, voyeurism, and the boundaries between public and private spaces.
I can see how that would spark a lot of debate and introspection. Was all of Acconci's work this shocking?
Not all of it, no. He also explored themes of vulnerability and emotional connection. For example, in his piece Theme Song from 1973, he sings popular songs but changes the lyrics to directly address the viewer, almost like he's trying to seduce them. It's quite intimate and even a bit unsettling.
So both pieces deal with the artist-viewer relationship, but in very different ways. It's like he's playing with the power dynamics between the artist and the audience.
Exactly. Acconci consistently challenged those traditional power structures, making viewers active participants in his work, whether they liked it or not.
Okay, 4 categories down. From language to landscapes to the human body, conceptual art is full of surprises.
It is. And we have one more category to explore. This one might be the most intense of all.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. What's next?
Yeah. Hold on tight. We're diving into conceptual art based on shock and sensation. And to kick things off, we have to talk about Marina Abramovich, the queen of performance art, known for pushing physical and mental limits to the extreme.
Oh, I've heard of her. Isn't she the one who did that intense performance where she let the audience do whatever they wanted to her for hours?
You're thinking of Rhythm Zero. one of her most iconic and unsettling pieces. But to really understand her work, we need to consider her upbringing. Abramovich grew up in communist Yugoslavia, a very strict and controlled environment, and her performances are often seen as a rebellion against those early experiences.
So she was using her art to break free from those constraints.
Exactly. In her early performances, she did some pretty wild things, taking drugs, inflicting self-harm, and enduring pain and exhaustion, all in the name of art.
That's intense. What was she trying to achieve?
Abramovich believed that by confronting pain and pushing her physical and mental boundaries, she could achieve a heightened state of presence and self-awareness. Her performances were a way of exploring the raw, visceral nature of human existence.
It's definitely a unique and challenging approach to art. So back to Rhythm Zero. Can you remind us what that performance involved?
Picture this. Abramovich stood motionless in a gallery for 6 hours. In front of her were 72 objects, including a rose, a feather, a whip, knives, and even a loaded gun.
Oh, wow. A loaded gun.
Yes, and the audience was instructed that they could do anything they wanted to her using these objects.
That sounds terrifying. What happened? Did people actually harm her?
The audience's reactions were a mixed bag. Some were gentle and curious, others more daring, and unfortunately, a few became quite aggressive and even cruel.
It's both fascinating and disturbing to think about, like a social experiment gone wrong.
It is. And afterward, Abramovich said something that really stuck with me. If you leave it up to the public, you can be killed. It's a stark reminder of the potential for both good and evil that exists within humanity.
Wow, that's heavy. Okay, I think we have time to squeeze in one more artist before we need to take a break.
Yeah.
Who else are we looking at in this category of shock and sensation?
Let's talk about Damien Hirst. He's become quite a figure, known for his bold personality and, of course, his controversial artwork. You might have seen pictures of his diamond-encrusted skull.
Oh, right, for the love of God. Yeah, that's an image that stays with you. But wasn't he also known for using animals in his artwork?
He was. One of his most famous or infamous pieces is The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living from 1991. It's a tiger shark, preserved in formaldehyde, suspended in a giant glass tank.
A shark in a tank. That's certainly memorable. What was Hearst exploring with this piece?
Hirst often grapples with themes of life, death, and the fragility of existence. He confronts viewers with their own mortality, forcing them to think about death even while we're still alive.
It's definitely a powerful image, one that makes you think about those big questions. I know Hearst has faced criticism for using animals in his art. What were some of the arguments against his work?
Some critics argued that it was unethical to exploit and kill animals for the sake of art. They also questioned his reliance on assistants to create his work, suggesting that he was more of a businessman than a true artist.
So there were ethical concerns as well as questions about authorship and the role of the artist.
Exactly. There were many layers to the debate surrounding Hirst's work. It wasn't just about the shock value or the visual impact, but about bigger questions of artistic intention, originality, and even the commodification of art.
This category is definitely full of complex and challenging pieces. I think we need a break to process all of this. But when we come back, we'll wrap up our exploration of conceptual art and international contemporary artists with one final category. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back! Ready to dive back into the world of conceptual art.
Absolutely. My brain is buzzing with all these incredible ideas.
That's what we like to hear. So for our final category, we're going to explore conceptual art based on ready-mades. And to illustrate this, we'll focus on a truly dynamic duo, Christo and Jean-Claude.
Oh, I know exactly who you're talking about. Those amazing artists who wrapped everything. Didn't they wrap coastlines, bridges, even entire islands?
They did. Their large-scale installations were truly something to behold. Christo and Jean-Claude were famous for taking everyday objects and materials like fabric or rope and using them to transform landscapes, buildings, and even monuments.
I remember seeing photos of their wrapped Reichstag building in Berlin. It was incredible. But their projects weren't just about creating a spectacle, were they? There was always a deeper meaning behind their work.
You're right. Christo and Jean-Claude were very intentional with their projects. By wrapping or draping these familiar structures, they were prompting viewers to see them in a new light, to reconsider their relationship to the environment, to public space, and even to history itself.
It's like they were making the ordinary extraordinary, and they often had to jump through a lot of hoops to get their projects approved, right?
They did. Many of their projects required years of planning, negotiations with government officials, and collaborations with engineers and architects. They were masters of logistics and diplomacy.
It's amazing how they managed to pull it off. It's a testament to their vision and determination. Do you have a favorite Christo and Jean-Claude project?
It's hard to choose just one, but Wrapped Coast, created in 1969, always comes to mind.
That's the one where they draped fabric over a mile and a half of Australian coastline, right?
That's the one. It was a truly monumental undertaking. They covered cliffs, rocks, even small islands with a shimmering fabric skin.
I can only imagine how amazing that must have looked in person. What were they trying to convey with that project?
By concealing the familiar coastline beneath fabric, they were drawing attention to its natural beauty and the dynamic way it interacts with the ocean. The fabric responded to the wind and the waves, creating a constantly changing visual experience.
It sounds like a breathtaking intersection of art and nature. Didn't they also do a project with umbrellas? I remember seeing photos of that as well.
You're thinking of the umbrellas, a massive installation from 1991. Christo and Jean-Claude placed thousands of blue umbrellas in valleys in Japan and thousands of yellow umbrellas in valleys in California simultaneously.
That's right. It must have been incredible to see those valleys dotted with all those colorful umbrellas. What was the significance of that project?
The umbrellas was really about bridging cultures and connecting people across continents. The simultaneous installations in Japan and California symbolized a shared human experience despite geographical distance. It was a celebration of unity and collaboration.
It's amazing how they use something as simple as an umbrella to create such a powerful and poetic statement.
Christo and Jean-Claude were masters of taking the ordinary and transforming it into something extraordinary.
Their work makes you realize that art can exist anywhere and take on any form. It's about looking at the world with fresh eyes and imagining new possibilities.
You've got it. They weren't afraid to push boundaries, challenge conventions, and engage with the world in a bold and imaginative way.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, that actually leads us to our final reflection for this deep dive into conceptual art and international contemporary artists. And it all circles back to a famous quote by Andy Warhol.
Oh, I think I know the one you're talking about. Didn't Warhol say something like, art is what you can get away with?
That's the one.
Yeah.
It's a bit provocative, isn't it? But I think it speaks to the heart of what conceptual art is all about. These artists we've been talking about, they were all pushing the limits of what was considered acceptable in the art world.
You're absolutely right. They were challenging traditional notions of art, using unconventional materials, and creating works that sparked controversy, confusion, and even outrage sometimes. And they got away with it.
So how does that apply to our listeners, those grade 12 art students who are prepping for their final exam and hopefully also feeling inspired to create their own groundbreaking artwork?
It's a call to action. We want you to think about how you can get away with something in your art. How can you push those boundaries and create work that challenges expectations and makes people think differently?
Don't be afraid to experiment. Use unexpected materials. Create art in unconventional spaces. Tackle challenging themes.
Think about what excites you, what makes you question the world around you. Let those ideas guide your creative process.
And remember, you don't have to create art for anyone else but yourself. Art can be a personal exploration, a way of processing your experiences and sharing your unique perspective with the world.
So as you prepare for your exam, don't just focus on memorizing names and dates. Think about the why behind each artwork. What was the artist trying to say? How did they challenge the status quo?
And then ask yourselves, how can I do that in my own work? How can I push those boundaries and create art that truly makes a statement? Who knows? Maybe one day we'll be discussing your work in a future deep dive.
That's our hope. We want to see the next generation of conceptual artists pushing the boundaries even further.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into conceptual art and international contemporary artists. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. And remember, keep creating, keep questioning, and never be afraid to push those boundaries.
And that's a wrap on conceptual art based on ready-mades.
Wow, what a journey this has been. From Duchamp's Fountain to Abramovich's radical performances and Christo and Jean-Claude's massive installations, conceptual art is full of surprises.
It certainly is, and it's an art movement that continues to evolve and inspire.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to bring it back to you, our listeners, especially those of you who are prepping for that grade 12 art exam. How can you take all of this amazing information and apply it to your own art making?
That's the key question, isn't it? How do we move beyond memorizing names and dates and really understand the core principles of conceptual art in a way that fuels our own creative expression?
Exactly. So let's think about that for a minute. What are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive? What are those big, bold ideas that really define conceptual art?
Well, first and foremost, conceptual art is all about the idea. The concept behind the artwork is paramount. It's not about traditional skills or aesthetics. It's about challenging conventions, pushing boundaries, and making people think differently.
Right? It's about using art to ask questions, to explore new possibilities, and to engage with the world in a meaningful way.
Exactly. And remember those categories we discussed? Language, concepts, sight, the body, shock and sensation, and ready-mades. Those are just starting points. Think of them as springboards for your own creative explorations.
So how can our listeners, those budding young artists, apply these ideas to their own work?
It starts with being curious and asking questions. What are you passionate about? What issues do you care about? What makes you think differently? Let those questions guide your artistic process.
And don't be afraid to experiment. Use unexpected materials, create art in unusual places, collaborate with others, think outside the traditional art world box.
Exactly. Challenge yourselves to think like the artists we've discussed. How would Duchamp approach this idea? What would Abramovich do? How would Christo and Jean-Claude wrap this concept?
It's about finding your own voice, your own way of expressing your ideas, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's part of the creative process. Sometimes the most unexpected results lead to the most groundbreaking art.
Absolutely. And remember, you don't need permission to be an artist. You don't need to wait for someone to tell you that your ideas are valid or worthy. Art is what you make it.
So go out there and create. Make art that challenges, inspires, and provokes. Art that makes people stop and think. Art that changes the world.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll be talking about your art on a future deep dive.
That's our hope. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into conceptual art and international contemporary artists. Thanks for joining us. We hope you learned a lot, and most importantly, that you feel inspired to create your own amazing, rule-breaking, thought-provoking art.
Keep pushing those boundaries. We can't wait to see what you come up with.